This week's show was a lot of fun. In it, one of my guests said something I said, which I thought was pretty smart. He called it utter nonsense, and then I called him naive. And then it went, well, it didn't exactly go downhill, but we got into it from there. The topic was China, and the question is whether China represents a big threat to all of us because of its mercantilist economic policies and really has world domination in mind, or as one of my guests held, that China is really very beneficial, and the fact that they're selling their goods in the world market for less than it costs them to make is great for all of us. Anyway, it's an interesting debate that I think you'll find interesting because it frames the issues in a way that I don't think is framed very often. So join me, and I hope you learn a lot.
Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Welcome. We're here today to talk about trade, specifically Donald Trump and trade. I was asked to give a speech not too long ago, or upcoming at CPAC, to talk about trade, and since I don't know enough about it, I thought I'd dive deeply and we'd have a show about trade. And I began researching, and I am confused. I've now been learning about OPEC, XM, Nafta, TPP, World Trade Organization, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, bilateral trade, multilateral trade. I've been learning about smart trade, fair trade, free trade, great trade, well-crafted trade. Well, anyway, to sort this out, my guests today are Ambassador Terry Miller, who's a career Foreign Service officer, 32 years with the State Department, and served as ambassador to the United Nations. Today, he's the head of the Center for Economics at Heritage Foundation, where he oversees the editing of the Index of Economic Freedom. Welcome, Terry.
Thanks.
And also with me today is John Tamny, old friend, many-time guest, who is the director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks and is the editor of Real Clear Economics. Markets. Okay. Markets economics, close enough.
That's right.
Terry, let's get this ball rolling a little bit. Donald Trump has been president for about a year, and as you know, I oversaw the economic agencies, and U.S. Trade Representatives was one of them, so I know a little bit more about those acronyms than I might have let on. But how's he doing? What's happening with trade, and what's your take on the first year?
You know, the president's done some great things in this first year. He came into office and immediately started the deregulation process. Our economy had been hamstrung by what happened during the 8 years of the Obama administration. And I think the liberation of businesses, enabling them to get the economy going again, to hire more freely, to invest with an idea that profits would be coming down the road, and just to move things a lot more quickly in the economy than you can when you've got a huge regulatory overload. That's an amazing achievement, and one that was long needed in this economy. He's followed that up with tax reform. We perhaps didn't get everything I would have liked to see in this tax bill, but we got a lot.
That's putting it mildly.
I think we got a lot, and I think it's going to provide a tremendous boost to the economy going forward. So, and we've also got the economy going great guns. The president does, and all of us working together. We've got economic growth rates up above 3% for the past 3 quarters. And what that means is that you've got a lot of investment, a lot of employment, a lot of the problems that occur in an economy when you've got stagnation going on. Those are going to go away. Some of them have already gone away. So I think in that respect, the president has done a great job. Now, you asked me about trade. Trade's a little different thing, and I do have some problems with the direction this administration has taken on trade. Trade is the foundation of economics. The exchange of goods and services among people is how you increase prosperity. The United States was basically founded as a national, continental-wide free trade area, and that's what's contributed to making us
So
the
Pennsylvania trading with Virginia.
Well, that's how it started, and now it's Maine and Hawaii.
Yeah.
I mean, what we've seen is that by breaking down the barriers across a wide geographic area like that, we've created
good
the most prosperous society on earth.
John, I want to give you a chance to jump in on trade.
Well, I agree with Terry. What is trade? All that is specialization. When you can trade freely, you can import from others, either from across the street or the other side of the world, who are doing what they do best, and that allows you to focus on what you do best. And when you're doing that which elevates your skills the most, you're more productive. And so without trade, we would live lives of unrelenting drudgery. In my case, I would die unemployed, unfed, and unclothed. Free trade allows me to do the few things I'm good at while importing from others.
Wow, I'm really happy we have trade.
Yes.
That's the fate I
I don't know what I would do without it.
I like you,
Yes,
so
yes.
thank goodness we have
Yes.
trade. Well, that's the theory of trade. Is that I want to talk a little bit about how it's actually happening in the real world. I mean, we've got people that think that Nafta has been a problem. China is a problem. People cheating on trade agreements. The idea we have multilateral trade agreements, which means that people can go through the World Trade Organization, for example, to sue the United States for things. And so in practice, though, we're not exactly in a free trade world. In many ways we are, but in practice we're not. What do you say to the people that, let's just pick an example, the World Trade Organization? Is that, and what should we be doing with them? First, what are they, and what should we be doing?
Well, the World Trade Organization is the place where governments have come together and put in place some basic rules of the road for trade relations. And what happens is that if you violate, one country or another violates those rules, then there are penalties involved. Other countries can retaliate in kind. The whole idea is to create a predictable system where everybody is treated fairly and you have a level playing field. And you talked about other countries being able to sue the United States, but in fact, it's the United States that has most frequently gone to the WTO to sue other countries. So it's been a vehicle for breaking down trade barriers in other countries around the world, and perhaps also a little bit of discipline on ourselves.
The World Trade Organization was formed out of the United Nations. What gave the impetus of that? Was that one of the many things that came after World War II?
Exactly. It came after World War II. It started as something called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade.
You could call that GATT.
GATT, exactly.
It's a tough name.
And that morphed in the 1990s into the World Trade Organization, but it's basically the same process going on. And it's just a forum where countries come together. It's designed to resolve disputes. It's not a place where countries get together and everybody collectively makes these grand decisions about anything. It's mostly a series of one-on-one conflict resolution processes. And it's hard to see how that's a bad thing.
So you like it and think it's working?
I do
Is
think
Trump
it-
taking a position with the WTO that's adverse to it, or is it
No, not particularly.
okay.
He's questioned it in the way he,
Yeah.
I think, questions all existing international arrangements and a lot of our national ones too. And it's good to question things from time to time.
Yeah.
These arrangements need to stand up to the test of time, and maybe they need to evolve over time as well.
Well, let's turn to China. That's the one country I am troubled by a bit, because it seems like we engage in trade. We think about things in terms of economic well-being. They seem to be operating out of a much different strategic playbook, where it's not just about economic well-being and not just about developing consumer goods. As a matter of fact, they're not particularly focused on consumers at all inside China, maybe outside China. Inside China, it's more of an industrial policy, including the real estate development. In the plan that we looked at for, I think it was the USTR, there was talk in there about Chinese mercantilism and they were currency manipulator. John, what do you think about that?
Utter nonsense. China is one of dozens and dozens of countries that pegs its currency to the dollar. That is a logical thing to do. The sole purpose of money, what did Adam Smith say? The sole use of money is to circulate consumable goods. When currencies have stable relationships, we're able to use them for their sole purpose. We're able to trade more, and in trading more, we're able to specialize. The Chinese are not producing like this to deprive themselves. Their production is an expression of a desire to import every bit as much as ours is. And you look at the constant examples of it. There are Chinese people living in Australia right now who are running lucrative businesses solely sending U.S. Foreign goods to China. In Shanghai alone, there are double the number of Starbucks than there are in all of New York. The notion that the Chinese aren't producing in order to get just like we are is defied by not just visibility. To visit China is to see this, and just in common sense. This notion that they're mercantilist, please, if we want to do that, I can go down a long list of American subsidies of U.S. producers here. But the main thing is, if countries are, quote, cheating, good. The only reason you produce is in order to get things. If countries around the world, including China, want to subsidize my paycheck and expand the value of it, please, I want more of it, because that's the ultimate.
Yeah, but can I jump in here?
Please do, because I don't agree with that, John. I think that's naive.
I have a little problem with some of that too, John. There's cheating and there's cheating. If China, I think it's very important that we define what we're talking about here. If China's doing things like subsidizing its manufacturers, or, I mean, let's face it, China doesn't have anything resembling a free market economic system like that in the United States. They have a state-controlled system. It's grown out of a totalitarian communist regime. So they have some very different ideas about how the state should intervene and control economic activity that would be completely unacceptable to us in the United States. Some people might call that cheating in some way. Well, maybe, but there's another kind of cheating when China intervenes to, for example, steal intellectual property from American firms or operate in a way that coerces them. Now, I know they don't necessarily have to go along with that. American firms are free actors in every respect, and they can stay out of China. But there is an element of coercion in Chinese economic activity, and I think you can't let them get away with things like the theft of intellectual property. That's just wrong.
Well,
That's the, John, if you look at the airline the airplane manufacturers, they wanted to get into China, sell their planes, and Chinese in effect said, look, we'll let you sell an airplane, but you got to give us access to the technology you're using. And now they're using that technology to build planes in China, and they've been subsidizing that. That's been operating at a loss. And now that they're operating profitably, they're now restricting the market for airplanes to be sold only in China that are made in China. I mean, that's hardly, I don't know how else you.
Well, I think you got to answer each one of those. If China wants to damage its own economy by limiting sales into China, let's not add insult to injury. Now, the notion that the manufacture of airplanes is free market is laughable. I point to you the Exim Bank's subsidization of Boeing. I point to you Airbus. Let's be serious. Intellectual property. The two greatest thieves of intellectual property probably in global history are Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. They both acknowledge that they got the majority of their information from Xerox PARC. Do we feel sorry for Xerox? No, Xerox had all this interesting stuff. They did not know what to do, that Xerox is on the way out as a serious company. The idea that you can steal intellectual property on the way to profits is laughable. We know this because who's the richest man in the world today? It is Jeff Bezos. By Bezos' own admission, he has lost billions and billions of dollars on new ideas that fail. The idea that you can steal an idea and turn it into profit is defied by common sense. Bill, you're in the movie business. You know the studio Pixar. What did Ed Catmull, the founder of Pixar, say? Every one of our movies sucks at first. We're only to make what is awful good because we're talented. The idea that you can steal something and turn it into profit is defied by economic history.
Well, I do know that if you want to get your movie distributed in China and it's made here, good luck. You just can't get in there. And yet they're buying up studios in California without any restrictions.
Well, so
if we can't sell into their market, why should we be turning around and selling our studios to them.
Well, because studios are privately owned. If you want to sell to the Chinese, you should be able to sell to whomever you want. But remember, the Chinese are not producing in order to deprive themselves. And so the idea that they're going to deprive themselves of
But
the
my
greatest
point,
movie productions in the
you're
world.
making this operate on an economic-only continuum. I think they've got a much more geostrategic point of view, and they're talking about being important all over the world. They're moving into Europe with industries now, and I don't think they're just thinking in terms of consumer well-being.
Yeah, but China, John's getting talking around a really important point here, which is that when China acts in these non-market oriented ways,
We really got you now, John. I said that what you're saying was naive. You're not naive, but I thought the theory was. And now Terry says you're talking around.
Neither
so
naive.
You're going to have to defend yourself. Here,
Happy
buddy.
to.
The point at the core of this is that when China acts in these strange ways that are strange to us and really the antithesis of our own system, they're not hurting us. They're hurting themselves at the core of this. When they restrict the entry of an American firm into China, the people that lose are the Chinese consumers who don't have access to those goods or services. And when we would retaliate, if we did, by restricting entry of Chinese goods or services into the United States, the Chinese firm may say, well, that's a shame, we don't have that market, but the people that are the real losers in that are Americans who don't have access to those goods and services that they otherwise would like to buy. So that's the main fallacy that's infecting the trade arguments, I think, including those of the Trump administration, which is all of these proposals that they're putting out there to renegotiate agreements or put restrictions in place or new tariffs of one kind or another. These are all things that are going to hurt Americans at the end of the day and only peripherally are going to have an impact on what foreign countries are doing.
Well, what about the idea that you talk about how great it is that they're selling us stuff and taking our dollars, but we're really, I have two things I worry about. One is I worry about manufacturing, for example. We are seeing fewer manufacturing. We've lost 60,000 manufacturing plants in the last 15, 20 years. That's a skill set. That's an expertise. That's an ability to do things. And I think when you lose some of that expertise, I think you lose a lot. And I think if you think of us as a country as opposed to just a trading partner, I think it matters that we preserve some of that expertise. I don't want to lose that whatever that is, but the other aspect of it is that we're financing, we talk about deficits don't matter, we're financing our purchases with massive borrowing. I mean, we've got federal debt, consumer debt is at an all-time high. Everything, we're financing this on leverage. So it's not exactly like we're buying things with money we've earned. We're buying it with money we've borrowed.
Well, the first two things, expertise you never have to worry about. Let's look at the oil industry. Under Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, they were the last two good dollar presidents. The U.S. oil industry disappeared, at least domestic drilling, because we had good monetary policy under both of them. Under George W. Bush, we devalued the dollar. Oil became very expensive. Out of nowhere, the U.S. had amazing expertise in an industry that's disappeared. In terms of manufacturing, that's what poor countries do. Let's be honest. We used to be all farming. Then we went to manufacture. Nowadays, the rich parts of the U.S. are rich precisely because they let others manufacture and we design. Apple doesn't manufacture the goods it creates. Nike has never produced in the United States. In terms of borrowing, you're a financier. Have you ever loaned to someone based on the idea that you thought they couldn't pay it back? We can borrow.
All I know is that Greek bonds are trading below treasuries. So I don't. You think people are rational actors? I don't.
Well, but ultimately they are, because
in many ways, John, people don't know where to put their money today because the credit markets have been so distorted by central bank policy that that's broken as well.
I think it still goes back to if you and I tried to get financing for our movie, or if Brian Grazer, the greatest movie producer in the world, he acknowledges he can't get financing the majority of the time. Markets are fairly efficient here. The U.S. has the most consumer debt in the world because we're the richest country. We are the richest, most productive people on earth. Rest assured, people in Haiti and Peru and Zimbabwe don't have people lining up trying to lend to them.
Well, I want to get us back to trade, but this is it. But it's all interesting. I think we're living in two bubbles. We're living in a bubble, a debt bubble, and we're living in a government promise bubble. And those two things are problems. But anyway, that's for another day. Coming back, anything else we should talk about with regard to China?
Yeah, I want to come back to the manufacturing issue
let's do that.
because manufacturing output in the United States is up.
Not by much.
We're just doing it with a lot fewer people. That's because technology has changed and the nature of manufacturing jobs has changed. Those jobs that have been lost are jobs that involved a wrench and turning screws and things. Gosh, Bill, when I was growing up, my grandfather worked in a glass plant in Palestine, Texas. And I got to visit that as a child, and I was fascinated by that place. It was this huge corrugated metal operation covered probably 10 acres or something. I'd go in there. It was hot. It was noisy. It was dangerous. There were these hot slugs of glass floating around on conveyor belts, a lot of broken glass out there. Last thing in the world that my grandfather wanted was for me to work in a place like that when I grew up. Those were jobs that were hard, dangerous, and those are jobs that the American economy has by and large eliminated for the very good cause that we have a lot better things to do with our time and energy that are more productive.
Unless you vote,
Beautifully said. I love it. It's so true, so true.
I'm so outgunned here by very smart guys. I think that's the reason Donald Trump was elected. Most of America doesn't agree with you. I think we live in a little county out in Rappahannock County, Virginia. Page County is the next county over. They had a blue jean factory, quite thriving. I don't know how many people employed, 150, 200 people. Not very great jobs, but they were jobs. And then Nafta comes in, and now those jobs have moved to Mexico. Now, our friend George Gilder points out, well, also the Mexican peso devalued by something like 95% during a period of time. And so there are other factors here besides NAFTA. But nevertheless, these jobs that we talk about that weren't that great of jobs, those people don't have new places to go.
I don't know. I drive through those towns too, and it's true. You'll be driving down the road and you'll see a factory that's all shuttered and rusty and closing. But you drive another 2 blocks down the road, and what you're going to likely see is a brand new hospital with high technology equipment, brand new employees. Our economy has completely shifted from manufacturing to a much greater emphasis on services. Now, I agree there's some problems there. The people that worked in that jean factory are not necessarily the same people that are working in that hospital.
They're not.
We've changed from relatively unskilled labor, mostly male unskilled labor, to the medical system that has requires much more in terms of education, probably has a much higher proportion of women in the workforce.
It's the next generation that's going to be doing those jobs.
Yeah, but I think it's, for one, I don't know how many jobs in that jean factory, but let's assume 10,000, which is probably overstating it. There are 330 million Americans.
Yeah.
And so how many jobs are we going to save in the very near term at the expense of hundreds of millions? But I think the other important point about this is we hear about these Trump towns, these forgotten towns and everything, and I think we get it backwards. Towns and cities don't die because factories leave them. They die because the talented people who are the magnet for investment leave them. New York City and Los Angeles, they were the #1 manufacturing towns in the early 20th century. All those manufacturing jobs are gone. That's why they're rich. Because talented people who attract investment don't want to do the jobs of the past. Terry's grandfather is instructive. He worked hard so that his kids and grandkids would not have to. And so the Trump towns that we're talking about, they're suffering precisely because those towns clung to the jobs of the past for too long. You look at where there's very little manufacturing, it's thriving in the United States. Well, precisely that is because that's where the talent goes, and that's where the investment subsequently goes.
But what I'm trying to get at is that there's a non-economic argument to the issues of trade, and economic disruption and innovation and change. And I think we play a political and cultural price for that change. And that's what I see playing out in what we're calling Trump towns. And that when we talk about trade policy, I think about good things. If you're an economic policy wonk, you want more jobs, you want higher wages, you want cheaper imports, higher quality imports, you want a robust, innovative economy. And yet we're seeing that those sort of things, if you look at trade, there seems to be an emphasis that's been put on cheaper goods and higher quality imports, regardless of where it comes from, and less emphasis on jobs and wages. Mm-hmm. And we've just sort of said, let the devil take the hindmost. If it can be manufactured better in Hungary, let's put it there.
Well, there's a fairness argument here that you're not taking into account.
That's the reason I want to do this show. I want to be corrected.
When you've got those...
Straighten me out.
I can't imagine it was 10,000 jobs in that jean factory.
That was the whole county.
That's the example we've started with, and let's go there. And if you put restrictions on that, what you're basically asking is for every American that buys a pair of jeans to pay an extra $1 in order to keep those 10,000 jobs in place. So you're asking one group of Americans, which is very large, millions of Americans, to subsidize the jobs so that these people can continue doing what they've done their whole lives, even though there's somebody overseas who's willing to do it more cheaply. How is that fair to the American public to ask them to subsidize? And these aren't rich people necessarily. These are poor people who are trying to dress their kids to go to school. These are Americans who may be living just from paycheck to paycheck, and yet you're asking them to take out of their monthly salary, whatever that is, a few dollars, but you're asking millions and millions of them to do that. Take a few dollars out of their paycheck and send them to this county over here to keep this business in place.
We can't have it both ways. Nancy Pelosi was criticized for calling the Republican tax cuts crumbs for the American worker.
It was like $1,000.
But then Trump turns around and says, I'm going to raise tariffs here, here, and here.
Yeah.
To Terry's point, penalizing every single worker. The other thing I would point out is that Borders Books wasn't taken out by someone in China. It was taken out by Seattle-based Amazon. Blockbuster wasn't taken out of business by someone overseas. It was taken out by Sunnyvale-based Netflix. Yellow cabs around the country aren't being taken out by foreigners. It's by San Francisco-based Uber. If we're going to complain about lower-priced goods, the greatest competition for, quote, American jobs occurs from right here. And so if you're going to go after that which erases the jobs of the past, I say thank goodness for that, but you're going after American companies first and foremost.
And remember, the largest private sector employer in the United States is Walmart, and they depend extremely heavily on imported goods and providing them at the lowest possible prices to Americans. So if you're going to talk about saving jobs or killing jobs in the United States, well, if you cut off that flow of traded goods, you're going to kill an awful lot of jobs in the retail sector.
Yeah, I think the point was made with the solar panels that while you're protecting X numbers of jobs in the manufacturing piece, you're killing 10 times the number in the installation side of the world. So if solar panels become prohibitively expensive because of the tariffs, you're putting those people out of work too. Is that?
Yeah, we have one example for which there's good data, which were the steel tariffs put in place by the Bush administration early in its in the early 2000s. And the point was to save 12,000 jobs in the steel producing industries in the United States. And what wound up happening was it killed 120,000 jobs in steel using industries. So you always have to take into account the consumers of the goods and services. And in many cases, those are other businesses, not just people shopping at Walmart, like I used as an example. American businesses, American manufacturers depend incredibly heavily on imported goods.
What about Nafta? We're in the process of renegotiating Nafta. China's on my mind. Canada. We have a young Mr. Trudeau in Canada. And we have a I guess their Canadian trade ambassador sort of reminds everybody of Elizabeth Warren. And so we're dealing with that. I don't know where Mexican is. We got a lot of intransigence. How's this is going to play out?
Well, in my perfect world, there wouldn't be trade agreements. I think as individuals, we should be able to
That's going to be
trade-
the last
to
question.
trade freely. But, okay. Okay.
That's
So
the
NAFTA,
summation.
I think what's got to be remembered is we talk about what a horribly negotiated deal, and I
Yeah.
think we're forgetting that the U.S. is already Hong Kong. The average tariff on foreign goods coming to the U.S. is 1.3, 1.4%.
Yeah.
That's why we're so rich. You work in order to get, precisely because we exchange with the world. The U.S. worker is the most specialized worker in the world. Free trade agreements, and Terry would know the intimacies or the intricacies of them far more than I would, are generally about opening up foreign markets to U.S. producers because we're already open. Again, that's why we're rich. And so, perfect world, we wouldn't have this, but it strikes me any of these deals are generally probably good because they make it more possible for U.S. producers to access foreign
Well,
markets.
one of the things in the agency action plan for trade was that U.S. trade representatives are going to need to hire more lawyers, and it was not because we were ending up to do anything here. It was just to get other countries to open up their trade. Is that what you're advocating? Assuming we have to have trade agreements in our less than perfect world.
My perfect world is I'd rather we not hire lawyers here. I just feel like those who produce are ultimately going to buy. They figure out a way to get it, and it's in my next book. But there is a very successful girl from China living in Australia right now. Her business is exporting to China from Australia all these goods. They're producing because they want to live like us. We can disagree about certain things, but if you're producing, you're ultimately going to buy them. I don't want to employ more lawyers here.
Yeah, trade agreements, I think, are becoming less and less significant over time. And modern trade agreements are as much about managing trade as they are about liberalizing trade at this point. John's absolutely right. Most trade flows freely throughout the world these days. My concern is that when we get into a renegotiating process, what it's really about is slowing down those trade flows or interfering with them rather than liberalizing them, as was the case in the past. So I'm a little bit skeptical of trade agreements these days, and I'm particularly skeptical about renegotiating any of them.
So, advice. Trump calls you into his office and says, okay, what should I do?
Well, I would say the first thing is make sure you're looking at the whole picture. Make sure you're looking at the interests of all Americans when you make any economic decision. And remember that it's in the nature of the U.S. government, when it gets involved in economic activity, that it's much more likely to do harm than it is to do good.
I think that's the key point. Anytime we start trying to manage these things from Washington, we know how it ends up.
You know, you've got 330 million people in the United States or whatever it is. There's a huge amount of knowledge out there. In Washington, D.C., you've got working in all these agencies, tens of thousands of people, but they just don't have the knowledge. As smart as they may be as individuals, they don't have the same level of knowledge that all those people out in the countryside working in all the different industries have about what they need and what they want. And isn't that the purpose of economic activity, to satisfy those needs and wants?
My advice to him was that if we're not allowed to buy from foreign producers, we can't sell to them. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that open trade is the greatest foreign policy mankind ever created because it gives each country a rooting interest. If you're trading with one another, you're less likely to go to war. What did Joseph P. Kennedy tell his son? Son, war is bad for business. Don't do it. It kills off the good stuff. After that, the practical advice would be that every president has imposed some sort of ridiculous economy sapping or people sapping tariff. So find some of the lamest industries that you can find that are least relevant, that are already heavily subsidized. Throw a few bones to this ridiculous wing in the party that wants to put up barriers to trade, and quiet the protectionist wing down and then secretly say, we are not suicidal. We do not are not in the business of cutting off the left hands of our people, which is basically what tariffs are. We are open for business.
Isn't that the solar panel industry?
Yes. That's why I did not lose my mind
And
over
isn't
that tariff.
it also is the washing machine industry?
Hey, you can have
Have you
them.
been,
Yes.
you've been talking to them?
Yeah. That was what I wrote at the time. I said, if he's going to do this,
These
okay,
are
it's
pretty good
moronic,
choices.
it's a tax increase, but at least this is something. Solar, oh, if we're going to kill that off, okay, you can have it.
Well, I think one of the things, having an agency that deals with trade is a little bit like having an agency that deals with energy or education or labor. We should probably just not even be in the business at all. Can I get some agreement there, John?
100% agreement.
Yeah, I'm with you on all four of those.
We don't have an agency that teaches us to breathe. And to me, trade is just about the same as breathing. If you're not allowed to do it, you suffocate
This
yourself.
would be Lamaze policy.
Yeah. Stay out of what is natural and beautiful. We have evolved as traders. What is the car, the internet, the airplane, the Erie Canal, the Panama? Everything we have done as evolving people is to make it easier for people to trade with one another.
And to carry the Lamaze analogy forward, bear in mind that what we're trying to do is allow people to give birth to the jobs of the future and not protect the old jobs of the past.
I think that's a great point to end on.
A crucial one.
Yeah. Well, for more about Trump and trade, take a look at our show notes on the website. And we've also got a lot of other notes on the topics that we've sort of drove into here. It's all interesting. You can find Terry Miller at
Heritage.org.
heritage.org and John Tamny.
Oh, freedomworks.org, realclearmarkets.com, all over the place. Anyone will have me.
And I'm looking forward to having you both back again for another show of lively discussion. Interesting people, interesting things.
Thanks for listening. Want more? Be sure to subscribe at thebillwaltonshow.com or on iTunes.